Long before the world knew her name, before physicians filled notebooks with observations they could not explain, and before thousands of pilgrims crowded the quiet streets of her village seeking answers, Therese Neumann was simply a farm girl. She was born on April 8, 1898, in the tiny Bavarian village of Konnersreuth, Germany, where life followed the rhythm of the seasons rather than the clock. The rolling green fields, dense forests and humble farms painted a peaceful landscape, but beneath that beauty lay a life of relentless labor. Families rose before sunrise, worked until darkness covered the fields, and depended entirely on the harvest to survive another winter. Therese was the eldest of 11 children born to Ferdinand and Anna Neumann, a deeply Catholic farming family whose wealth was measured not in money, but in faith, perseverance, and hard work. From childhood, she stood out. She possessed neither extraordinary education nor remarkable social status. In fact, she attended school only briefly before helping support her family. Yet those who knew her remembered an unusual kindness in her eyes and an uncommon serenity in her character. She loved attending Mass, she loved praying the Rosary, and more than anything, she dreamed of becoming a missionary. Inspired by stories of Catholic missionaries serving in Africa, she imagined dedicating her life to caring for children, tending to the sick, and bringing hope to places consumed by poverty. Every spare moment she had was spent reading about saints who had sacrificed everything for Christ. Among all of them, one young Carmelite nun captured her heart, Thérèse of Lisieux, later known as Sainte Thérèse of the Child Jésus. The French nun had died in 1897, just months before Therese Neumann was born. Her message of finding holiness through ordinary acts of love profoundly influenced millions of Catholics, and young Therese felt an immediate spiritual connection with her namesake. Little did she know that this devotion would later become inseparable from the most astonishing moments of her own life. But before that could happen, suffering arrived without warning. Had you ever heard of St. Therese Neumann before today? Have you or anyone you know ever received a blessing, a miracle, or the intercession of St. Therese Neumann? Write it down in the comments below. I read every single one of your comments, and I'll leave a heart on yours. If this story warms your heart, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family so they can strengthen their faith too. The saints were forgotten once, and together we will never let that happen again. The year was 1918. Europe was already exhausted by the devastation of the First World War. Resources were scarce, families struggled to survive, and every pair of working hands was precious. One afternoon, an alarm spread through the village. A neighboring barn had caught fire. Without hesitation, Therese rushed to help. Villagers formed desperate lines, passing buckets of water from hand to hand, while flames climbed higher into the sky. Smoke filled the air. Frightened animals cried from inside the burning structure, and everyone fought desperately to prevent the fire from spreading. As Therese carried heavy buckets across unstable ground, disaster struck. She slipped. The fall seemed ordinary at first. She stood up and continued helping, refusing to complain. No one imagined that this single moment would completely alter the course of her life. Within days, severe pain developed in her back. At first, everyone believed it was only a muscle injury. Weeks passed. Instead of healing, the pain intensified. Soon she found it difficult to stand. Walking became agonizing. Simple movements left her exhausted. Doctors examined her, but medical knowledge at the time offered few solutions. Different physicians proposed conflicting diagnoses. Some suspected spinal trauma, while others believed the injury had triggered a complex neurological disorder. Whatever the cause, her condition deteriorated relentlessly. The vibrant young woman who once spent entire days working outdoors gradually became confined indoors. Then came the seizures. Violent convulsions shook her body unexpectedly. Her family watched in horror, powerless to stop them. As if the paralysis and constant pain were not enough, another tragedy followed. Her eyesight began to fade. At first, objects appeared blurred, faces became shadows, sunlight itself seemed dimmer. Eventually, everything disappeared. Darkness consumed her world. Therese had become completely blind. She was only in her early 20s. Imagine the emotional weight of that moment. The girl who had dreamed of traveling across continents to serve God, could no longer even walk across her own room. The young woman who had hoped to care for others now depended entirely upon her parents and siblings for the smallest daily tasks. Years passed. She remained bedridden. Because she could not move properly, painful pressure sores formed across her body. Some wounds became dangerously infected. Reports from the time described serious complications affecting her legs and feet, leading some physicians to fear permanent tissue damage. Every movement caused pain. Every day seemed identical to the one before. Visitors expected to find a bitter, broken woman. Instead, they encountered someone astonishingly peaceful. Her suffering had not destroyed her faith, it had deepened it. Rather than asking why God had abandoned her, Therese often prayed that her own pain might somehow help others who were suffering spiritually or physically. Those closest to her recalled that she rarely complained. She smiled, she encouraged visitors, she comforted those who came intending to comfort her. Her small bedroom slowly became a place of quiet prayer. Neighbors began stopping by simply to speak with her. Some left saying they felt strangely strengthened after spending only a few minutes beside her bed. No miracles had yet occurred. No mysterious phenomena had appeared. Yet something about her unwavering peace already distinguished her from everyone around her. As months turned into years, doctors gradually lost hope. Medical science had reached its limits. The prognosis remained bleak. Permanent blindness, permanent paralysis, permanent disability. There seemed to be no realistic possibility of recovery. Then came May 1923. Far away in Rome, Pope Pius V celebrated the beatification of Therese of Lisieux, the young French Carmelite, whom Therese Neumann had loved since childhood. Unable to travel, she followed the ceremony through prayer from her bedroom. According to her own testimony, she asked Saint Therese for only one favor, not wealth, not comfort, but simply the grace to fulfill God's will. What happened next stunned everyone in the room. Suddenly, she cried out that she could see. At first, her family struggled to believe her. She identified objects around the room. She recognized the faces of her relatives. She described details she could not possibly have known if she had remained blind. After years of darkness, her sight had returned. Doctors examined her again. No surgery had been performed. No experimental treatment had been attempted. The blindness that had once appeared irreversible had vanished. The news spread rapidly beyond Konnersreuth. Some believed they had witnessed divine intervention. Others insisted there had to be a medical explanation not yet understood. But the greatest surprise was still waiting. Although her eyesight had returned, Therese remained unable to walk. She continued living with paralysis, relying on others for nearly every physical need. 2 years later, another extraordinary date approached. On May 17, 1925, the Catholic Church canonized Therese of Lisieux as a saint. As the celebrations unfolded in Rome, Therese Neumann once again united herself spiritually with the event from her modest home in Bavaria. Family members later recounted that during prayer, she suddenly experienced an overwhelming interior certainty. Then something happened that no physician present believed possible. The woman who had spent years confined to her bed slowly sat upright. She placed her feet on the floor. She stood. For a brief moment, everyone in the room remained frozen, scarcely daring to breathe. Then, step by step, she began to walk. The deep sores that had covered her body were found to have healed. The crippling pain disappeared. Strength returned to limbs that had long seemed lifeless. Word of the astonishing recovery spread throughout Germany with astonishing speed. Doctors, journalists, theologians, skeptics, and curious visitors all began making their way to the tiny village of Konnersreuth. Some arrived hoping to witness a miracle. Others came determined to expose a fraud. None of them could have imagined that the remarkable healing would become only the beginning of one of the most mysterious and extensively documented religious cases of the 20th century. Chapter 2. The woman who lived for decades without food or water. The astonishing recovery that restored Therese Neumann's sight and mobility transformed the quiet village of Konnersreuth into a place of growing curiosity. Word spread rapidly across Bavaria and beyond. Some called her healing a miracle. Others insisted there had to be a medical explanation waiting to be discovered. For a brief moment, it seemed that the most extraordinary chapter of her life had already been written. It had not. Soon after her recovery in 1925, those closest to Therese began noticing subtle but puzzling changes in her daily routine. Meals were prepared for the family as usual, but she barely touched them. At first, no one worried. Perhaps her appetite had simply diminished after years of illness. But days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. The untouched plates continued to leave the table exactly as they had arrived. Then came an even stranger realization. She was not drinking either. No water, no milk, no tea, nothing. When questioned, Therese answered calmly that she simply did not feel hungry or thirsty. There was no struggle in her voice, no attempt to impress anyone. She described the experience as something completely natural, almost as though the desire for food had quietly disappeared from her life. Her family became deeply concerned. They begged her to eat. Priests advised her to obey the doctors. Physicians warned that starvation would inevitably lead to organ failure, dehydration, muscle wasting, and death. Every principle of human biology pointed toward the same unavoidable conclusion. No person could survive under such conditions. Yet the expected decline never came. Instead of growing weaker, Therese continued her daily routine. She attended Mass whenever her health allowed. She prayed for long hours. She welcomed visitors into her modest home. She held conversations that sometimes lasted late into the evening. Those who met her often remarked on the clarity of her mind and the surprising vitality she displayed, despite what appeared to be complete abstinence from food. According to numerous testimonies, the only thing that entered her mouth each day was the tiny consecrated host she received during Holy Communion. To believing Catholics, this carried profound symbolic meaning. The Eucharist, understood in Catholic theology as the body of Christ, seemed to become her only nourishment. To skeptics, however, such reports sounded impossible. Accusations quickly followed. Some newspapers suggested she secretly ate at night. Others claimed her family must have been hiding food. Certain critics dismissed the entire story as religious fanaticism or deliberate deception designed to attract pilgrims. The controversy grew so intense that church authorities realized the claims could no longer be ignored. Rather than discouraging scientific investigation, the Diocese of Regensburg decided to welcome it. If fraud existed, it needed to be exposed. If no fraud existed, the facts needed to be documented with extraordinary care. In the summer of 1927, one of the most remarkable medical observations ever conducted on a religious figure began. Therese agreed without hesitation. She had nothing to hide. Her home was temporarily transformed into an observation center. 4 trained nurses were assigned to monitor her continuously. Their shifts overlapped so that she would never be left alone. A physician supervised the investigation. Visitors were strictly limited. Every room was carefully inspected. Every window remained under observation. Every possible opportunity for receiving hidden food or water was eliminated. Nothing escaped documentation. The investigators recorded her pulse. They measured her body temperature. They monitored her weight with precision. Her bodily functions were carefully noted. Every hour was accounted for. Day after day passed. The nurses expected to witness the gradual collapse of her body. Instead, they watched something that none of them could explain. Therese remained remarkably stable. She slept. She prayed. She spoke normally. She showed no obvious signs of extreme dehydration. There were no desperate cries for water, no visible panic caused by starvation. Her demeanor remained peaceful. As the days continued, astonishment quietly replaced skepticism among several members of the medical team. After 15 continuous days, the observation ended. According to the official reports preserved from the investigation, no food had been consumed. No water had been taken. Even more surprising, there had been no significant loss of body weight that would normally accompany complete fasting under ordinary physiological conditions. The findings did not provide a scientific explanation. Neither did they declare the phenomenon supernatural. Instead, the observers simply documented what they had witnessed. For scientists, the case remained an unsolved biological puzzle. For believers, it appeared to confirm something extraordinary. The debate had only intensified. News of the investigation spread throughout Europe. Medical journals discussed the unusual case. Newspapers printed sensational headlines. Some articles portrayed Therese as living proof of divine intervention. Others accused the investigators themselves of being naive. Yet none of the criticism erased the growing mountain of eyewitness testimony. Over the following years, physicians from different countries traveled to Konnersreuth, hoping to discover evidence of deception. Many arrived determined to expose her. Few left with the certainty they had expected. Some admitted privately that while they remained unconvinced of a miracle, they also could not explain everything they had personally observed. The phenomenon became known among Catholics as inidia, a term referring to the reported supernatural ability of certain mystics to live without ordinary nourishment. Although similar claims had been associated with a handful of medieval saints, including Saint Catherine of Siena and Blessed Lidwina of Schiedam, never before had such a case been examined with modern medical methods, photography, written reports, and continuous observation. Therese's life therefore occupied a unique place at the intersection of faith and science. Researchers debated metabolism, theologians discussed divine providence, philosophers questioned the limits of empirical knowledge. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of the controversy remained astonishingly uninterested in defending herself. She rarely spoke publicly about the phenomenon. She never organized lectures. She never attempted to profit from her growing fame. There were no admission fees for visitors, no books written under her name during those years to capitalize on public fascination, no grand public appearances designed to attract attention. She continued living in the same modest farmhouse where she had been born. Her room remained simple: wooden furniture, religious images hanging quietly on the walls, a crucifix above the bed, fresh flowers placed there by visitors. Nothing suggested the home of someone who had become one of Europe's greatest religious mysteries. Pilgrims came anyway. They arrived by train, carriage, bicycle, and eventually by automobile. Some sought healing, others carried impossible questions. Parents brought sick children. Soldiers traumatized by war came searching for peace. Professors arrived carrying notebooks filled with skepticism. Journalists hoped for sensational headlines. Many expected dramatic speeches. Instead, they encountered a remarkably humble woman whose greatest concern was listening to the suffering of others. Visitors frequently remarked that Therese seemed far more interested in praying for them than in discussing herself. If someone praised the extraordinary events surrounding her life, she quietly redirected attention toward God. She insisted that any gifts she possessed were not hers to claim. This humility puzzled even some of her harshest critics. If she were deceiving the world, why seek no wealth? Why reject publicity? Why continue living as an ordinary village woman despite international attention? Those questions lingered unanswered. Yet while scientists continued examining the mystery of her apparent survival without food or water, another phenomenon was beginning to emerge, one that would prove even more startling. Every Thursday evening, an unmistakable silence settled over her small room. Those closest to her recognized the signs. Her expression changed. Her breathing grew slower. An atmosphere of profound solemnity filled the house. By Friday morning, visitors would witness scenes that many would later describe as the most unforgettable experience of their entire lives. For it was then that Therese Neumann's body appeared to relive, with extraordinary intensity, the final hours of Jesus Christ's Passion. Chapter 3: The Wounds of the Passion, the Tears of Blood, and the Mystery of Ancient Languages. Every Thursday evening, the atmosphere inside the Neumann home began to change. The ordinary sounds of village life slowly disappeared. Farm tools were put away, doors were closed, and the narrow streets of Konnersreuth fell beneath the silence of the Bavarian night. Yet inside Therese Neumann's small bedroom, another reality seemed to be approaching, one that witnesses would struggle to describe without trembling. Therese would become unusually quiet. Her cheerful expression faded. Her eyes seemed fixed upon something beyond the walls of the room, as though she were watching events invisible to everyone else. Her breathing changed, her face grew pale, and an intense sadness settled over her features. Those who had witnessed the phenomenon before knew what was beginning. Therese was entering the Passion. The first reported stigmata appeared during Lent in 1926. According to accounts surrounding her life, the experience began with a vision of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. Therese seemed to witness his loneliness, his anguish, and the abandonment of the disciples who had fallen asleep nearby. Then a wound appeared near her heart. Blood marked her clothing. In the weeks that followed, other wounds reportedly developed on her hands and feet. Marks appeared on her forehead, resembling injuries associated with the crown of thorns. A wound also opened on her side, recalling the spear wound described in the Gospel account of Christ's crucifixion. These injuries did not remain hidden beneath vague stories. They were seen by family members, priests, physicians, journalists, and visitors who traveled from different parts of Europe. Photographs were taken, medical examinations were performed, bandages were applied and later removed. The wounds repeatedly became active during her Friday ecstasies. On ordinary days, Therese could appear lively and approachable. She enjoyed flowers, birds, and the simple rhythm of rural life. She spoke with visitors, listened to their problems, and sometimes displayed a warm sense of humor. But when the passion began, that familiar personality seemed to disappear beneath overwhelming suffering. Her body became rigid, her hands tightened, her head moved as though following people crossing an invisible scene. At moments, she appeared frightened. At others, grief covered her face so completely that witnesses said it was almost unbearable to watch. She whispered names. She reacted to questions no one in the room had asked. She seemed to observe the arrest of Jesus, the interrogation before the authorities, the denial of Peter, and the cries of the crowd demanding condemnation. Her family could do little but remain beside her. As the visions intensified, blood began to flow from the wounds on her forehead. Thin streams moved down her face, staining the cloth placed beneath her head. The marks on her hands and feet also reportedly opened, and the wound near her side became painful. Yet the most disturbing phenomenon appeared in her eyes. Tears darkened with blood gathered beneath her eyelids. They slowly ran across her cheeks. To those present, the sight was terrifying. Therese did not appear to be performing for the crowd. During these episodes, she seemed almost unaware of the people surrounding her. Her attention remained fixed on the vision she claimed to be witnessing. Some observers prayed, others wept. A few could not remain in the room. Doctors attempted to understand whether the bleeding could have been produced artificially. Critics suggested hidden instruments, self-inflicted wounds, or psychological causes. Others argued that powerful emotional states might create unusual physical reactions. But no single explanation satisfied everyone. The Church itself remained cautious. Catholic authorities did not immediately declare the phenomena miraculous. Investigations were conducted. Access to Therese was sometimes restricted, and witnesses were questioned. Church leaders understood that religious enthusiasm could distort judgment, and that extraordinary claims demanded careful examination. Therese herself did not demand recognition. She did not call herself a saint. She did not claim that her wounds proved personal holiness. When people focused too heavily on the blood, she tried to direct them toward the suffering of Christ rather than toward her own body. For her, the visions were not a spectacle. They were an experience of compassion, an entry into the sorrow of the Passion. There was, however, another mystery unfolding during these ecstasies. Therese Neumann had received only a modest village education. She was not a scholar. She had never studied at a university, never completed formal linguistic training, and did not possess access to the advanced academic resources available to professors of ancient languages. Her ordinary speech was the Bavarian dialect of her region. Yet during the visions, witnesses reported hearing unfamiliar words. Therese appeared to repeat phrases spoken by the figures she claimed to see. At different moments, she pronounced expressions that scholars identified as forms related to ancient Aramaic, Greek, Latin, or other languages associated with the world of the New Testament. This phenomenon drew the attention of language specialists. Among the researchers who became closely associated with her case was Professor Johannes Lepsius, known for his knowledge of Eastern languages, as well as other clerics and academics familiar with biblical linguistics. They listened carefully as Therese repeated sounds during her ecstasies. The scholars did not all agree on what they heard. Some believed certain phrases resembled Aramaic expressions that a simple Bavarian woman could not reasonably have learned. Others identified words connected with Greek or Latin liturgical and biblical traditions. Skeptics argued that she might have absorbed phrases from sermons, religious readings, conversations with priests, or visitors without consciously remembering them. But supporters of the phenomenon pointed to her pronunciation. They claimed she did not merely repeat isolated religious words. At times, she appeared to reproduce the rhythm and structure of conversations unfolding within her visions. Therese described scenes with remarkable spatial detail. She indicated where people stood. She reacted as though crowds were moving before her. She distinguished between the clothing, gestures, and voices of various figures. According to witnesses, she sometimes corrected artistic representations of the Passion, insisting that certain details had occurred differently from the way European painters traditionally depicted them. One such point concerned the shape of the cross and the manner in which it was carried. She also reportedly described landscapes, buildings, roads, and customs unfamiliar to her rural Bavarian surroundings. To believers, these details suggested mystical knowledge. To critics, they reflected the powerful imagination of a woman deeply immersed in Catholic devotion. But inside the room, the arguments of scholars seemed distant. The experience continued hour after hour. Therese appeared to witness Jesus being condemned. Her face reacted to the scourging with shock and sorrow. She recoiled as though hearing blows. During the carrying of the cross, her breathing became strained and her body moved as if sharing the weight she saw placed upon Christ. When the vision reached Calvary, the room grew intensely still. Witnesses described Therese staring upward, her expression filled with helpless grief. She appeared to follow the raising of the cross. Her lips moved as though repeating words spoken from it. At the moment corresponding to Christ's death, her head fell forward. Her body became motionless. Those present sometimes feared that she herself had died. The silence could last several minutes. Then her breathing gradually returned. The Friday ecstasy left her physically exhausted. Her face remained marked by dried blood, and the cloths around her often bore visible stains. Yet as the hours passed, she slowly returned to her ordinary awareness. The transformation could be startling. The woman who had appeared overwhelmed by suffering would once again recognize those around her. Her voice softened. She sometimes asked about the visitors who had come to see her, particularly those carrying personal grief. Outside the house, the number of pilgrims continued to grow. People gathered in the streets of Konnersreuth before sunrise, hoping to be admitted. Some traveled for days. Trains arrived carrying the sick, the curious, the faithful, and the skeptical. Journalists waited for statements. Scientists requested examinations. Priests tried to maintain order. The Neumann family struggled to protect Therese from exhaustion while also responding to the thousands who believed that simply being near her might change their lives. And every week, as Thursday night returned, the small farmhouse prepared once more for the mysterious sequence of visions, ancient words, bleeding wounds, and blood-colored tears that had transformed an unknown Bavarian village into one of the most controversial spiritual centers of the 20th century.